Now let's listen to Maria Ressa once again. She will tell us about technology, development, and leadership. How do we achieve these 17 global goals? Maria?
You're going to be so bored with me already. That was amazing. Thank you, Ola. It was great to get it in our hands. What I'm going to try to do is bring it to what you can do with it. And you can see some of what we've done with it on Rappler. So let's go. I've just been cut. So I'm coming down. Let's go to the first. So technology development and hashtag the leader I want. I'm going to take the challenge you set, which is here we have the global goals, and here we have hashtag PH vote. Kind of how way we started. Let's go. Next. So here's the mega trend. I'm going to be a little bit, you know, I have a geek streak, so please bear with me while I throw some of these things at you, right? This is the top mega trend from Global Trends 2030. It is about you. It is about us. It is about individual empowerment. And you kind of heard that from the great videos that we saw. But this is what it can accomplish. It can reduce poverty. The goal, actually, that the UNDP just said is end poverty in 15 years, right? Poverty reduction. So let's try to end poverty. Growth of the global middle class. Why is our middle class going overseas? The best and the brightest are the engines of growth of any nation. And we, for a very long time, keep sending them overseas. Our OFWs, our overseas Filipino workers, are our largest dollar earners. We can bring them home. We can learn more. We can achieve more in education. New communications and manufacturing technologies. Rappler wouldn't exist 5 years ago. And it's not just Rappler that's in the new communications and manufacturing technologies. There's a lot of stuff that can do. And some of them you might be thinking about, you might be able to create after you leave here. And then the last one is healthcare. People are living longer, right? So here's the irony of it. Even as our pace of change is increasing, our attention span is getting shorter, partly because of social media. But you know, I joke in Rappler all the time. I say I became a journalist almost 30 years ago, at a time when the lifespan of a story is the lifespan of a human being. You know, 85 years is the normal average lifespan of a human being. In the world of the internet today, I say we live at the lifespan of a fruit fly, 2 weeks, right? So that's the pace. It's gotten so fast, it's compressed so fast. And yet, how does that connect to healthcare advances? We're living longer as people. So imagine trying to sprint ahead all the time, but a longer period. So this is some of the things we have to deal with. Next slide. I remind you of that graph. If we want to be an Uber of nations, we want that exponential growth. Senator Aquino told you about some of the things he's already worked on and what he's going to continue to work on. The Chief Justice has told us what she's working on in terms of justice. Now, a lot of this comes back to you because the engine of growth of a nation, 85 to 90% comes from small and medium enterprises. So even though we will, you know, rail against large companies that we also want, small and medium enterprises are the engines of our economy. So that's what we want. Next slide. I'm going to show you this because this is really what changed. All of the other slides come from 3 days in August where I spent thinking about development and technology. And the woman you see over there is Helen Clark. She is the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, but now the Chief Administrator of UNDP. And she is, my gosh, she's waiting for a bus and she's talking global goals. You know, every waking minute is focused on how can we end global poverty? How can we do this? So this meeting in Aspen that we had for about 40 people really focused on, okay, Alla told us about the top down. Now, how can we tear it apart? I just have to show you that photo because this is something I'm telling you, as a journalist there, I was like padlocked. I couldn't really tell you what was happening, like this photo, which I know we're live streaming to the world, but I'll show you the photo, not the video I took. World leaders singing Home on the Range. That is Madeleine Albright, former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, former Irish President Mary Robinson from Ireland. And it was incredible watching them grapple with world issues as they were human beings. The same way that we should be grappling with the world issues, but we can take it apart in our daily lives. Next slide. So these are the lessons coming out of that. The 3 global trends that we can do something about that is happening, that is powering global goals is, we said it, internet, increase connectivity and digital literacy. Everyone in this room is connected. Otherwise, I don't think you'd be here. And I'm sure you've helped your parents, your grandparents, your sister, or your younger brother get connected and be literate on social media, on the internet. The second, how are we going to do the global goals? Financial inclusion through digital payments, mobile phones. That's what everyone came out of this meeting with. And then the last part, and you'll hear about big data after me from Mario, but the last part is taking big data and then putting it right back to work to help the poor, because we can. And how do we jumpstart all of this? Again, I tell you, this is in our hands, in your hands. We get the internet, that helps get you that spike. And what is it on the internet that empowers all of us immediately? It's social media. So we band together. This is part of the reason we're all here. We can band together to make things happen. And the last part, second is mobile phone. So the second is mobile phone, and the third is social media. Why the mobile phone? I'll show you the next slide. Because of this. So worldwide, you have about 1/3 of the world already on the internet, right? About 3 billion internet users, about 40% of the world's population, 5.2 billion mobile phone users at a 73% penetration rate. But let's look at the Philippines. 40% internet penetration rate. So we still have 60% to bring in. Imagine when we bring everyone in, right? But we are bringing them in. So we don't just have to wait for Smart and Globe and the others who are working on internet connectivity, because there are others, and government. We can also look at what we can do with mobile. And if you're thinking, here's the last part. You heard from Senator Aquino from BAM about what you can do on Facebook. 46 million Filipinos are on Facebook. That's a lot. Next slide. So that's our landscape. Now, globally, I'll go back and then I'll zoom in after this. If we can get the other 2/3 of the people on the internet, and I zoomed in on the internet because it's oxygen for Rappler, and I think it's oxygen for many of you here. If we can get the other 4 billion people online, so if we can get them online, it would add $2.2 trillion in additional GDP, 140 million new jobs. It'll lift 160 million people out of extreme poverty. That's globally. And it feeds on itself, this cycle, right? The more internet access we have, whether it is through our phone or through internet.org or through any way, it'll spur development, because more and more of us can actually create more things so we can do that hockey stick, which then would increase our ability to get more money to build our businesses, to build our communities, which can then raise GDP, and it'll start that cycle again. I know that sounds super idealistic and very fast to pull it together, but you're sitting, I see some of you here, and I know some of you have startups. Some of you have advocacies that you're pushing. It is possible to make it do the hockey stick with the mobile phone, with the mobile first, with the focus on internet. Let's go to the next slide. So let's talk internet connectivity for us. Earlier this morning, the telcos talked about, both Smart and Globe talked about what they were doing in terms of the global goals and how they're trying to bridge that. Both of them have mobile financial, the ability to send money on mobile phones, the ability to bank on mobile phones. They're able to, for example, if you're a small company in Basilan and you cannot get your payroll from the bank to wherever the people are without fears of security, it can be sent on mobile phones. That's already happening now. It's one of the ways we can get around it. So the telcos are working on these things, but as they pointed out earlier in the morning session, in most countries, the government also helps provide a strong backbone. So there's got to be some kind of connection that we need to make here, right? TV white space, that's an initiative by DOST, the government, and Microsoft. TV white space takes TV signals and actually gives you internet access. I've tried it, but it's still not there. It's still not at a point where we're breathing oxygen with it. Google and Facebook are coming into this in a very, very big way. And it sounds like fantasy land sometimes, but Google has Project Loon. How many of you guys have heard of Project Loon? Okay, so Project Loon, this sounds kind of, again, like fantasy. It wants to get 4 to 5 billion people connected by 2020. High-speed internet access through helium balloons that float. And those helium balloons give 4G connections. And they're actually testing this now with carriers in countries like South Africa and New Zealand. And then the last one is Facebook, internet.org. Both Globe and Smart also are connected to internet.org. Rappler is available to you on internet.org, as well as a host of other websites. But it is optimized for low bandwidth environments. And as of now, they feel like they've given the numbers of they've connected 9 million people in 15 low-income countries. That includes India and the Philippines. Next slide. Okay, this is the last one before I go into very specific things you've helped us do. This is really the impact of that increased connectivity, and look at the impact on our lives and what it means for you. It'll reduce economic exclusion, meaning I remembered when I first came to the Philippines in 1986, it's a different world between here and New York or here and London, where many of the jobs I was looking at were. And there's an income disparity. All of that goes away if we can get connected. Well, not overnight, but look at what it can do. Global opportunities for education. We can educate ourselves on Coursera. You can take an Ivy League course on Coursera. You can get a job on freelancer.com. There's a startup by a young lady in her 20s that connects tech coders in countries outside of the Western world and brings them to be hired by tech companies that are home. But or in Holo or anywhere else which used to seem remote can be heard and felt by the world like that. That's what it can do. The last one is it will change leadership structures. And it will change it because we can now go bottom up. What most politicians will tell you, and Chai Hofilenya wrote a book about elections in the 2010 elections, is that you need a lot of money to be able to even run for office in our country. For president, it's something like 3 billion pesos. You need a minimum of 3 billion pesos to run for president. How can you run for president? How can an ordinary person do this? We think that there's a way with this new technology, right? And the way you elect leaders, is it still going to be the song and dance? Or can we use sustainable? Can we use global goals? And then I'll bring it home now. I have a few minutes. Next slide. I talked about hashtag Million People March, and I come to this because this is our first internet peer-to-peer driven protest in the Philippines, and it was against corruption. Remember this? August of 2013. It took one Facebook post 7 days to get about 100 to 120,000 people in Luneta Park. And when you got there, it was kind of boring, right? If you walk through the park, there was no central stage, there was no organization, there was no program. That is what an internet peer-to-peer driven protest looks like. So it's bottom up. And this is what it looks like when we map it. It looks like that. Ang gulo niya, di ba? Each one, it's very different from what you saw earlier when we were showing you the community. And magulo talaga siya. Why? Because each of those colors are communities waiting for information to become communities of action. So that's part of what we as journalists need to do and what you as consumers, as Filipinos, need to do, to take information to create communities of action. Next slide. We did hashtag Shake Drill. And again, you would think this also goes with the global goals. Why would we do something like this? Why would a news group do this? Because in the end, if that earthquake hits, do you know what you're going to do? The estimate is anywhere from 35,000 to almost 40,000 family do. And this is what hashtag I'll dub, I think. You gotta beat the Jane began because there's a little Rappler in Indonesia had one Filipino bureau chief. Then we just started to add 2 more reporters around that time. There were all these people, a few people who were slated for death row. Drug trafficking, there were 9 Australians, and then there was this one Filipina that no one was really paying attention to. Our reporter decided to do a story and kept doing stories, because then the more stories we did, the more we found out that, wow, in her trial, she can't speak Bahasa Indonesia. She didn't understand her trial. She wasn't able to defend herself. It looked like she had been duped into this. So the story went. And as the journalists were doing the story, all of a sudden, Move PH kicked in with our community. And the hashtag, along with change.org, took a life of its own. And that hashtag didn't really kick in until the Saturday before the Tuesday she was slated to be executed. And overnight, it was incredible, the amount of caring. People read, we could see it, every single move. We could see the votes on the mood meter. But all of a sudden, it was at 1 a.m. in the morning. President Aquino, I think during the day, was at the ASEAN summit. And it's funny, one of the guys with him actually told me that they were trying to call the Indonesian president and they couldn't get signal. So it's not just in the Philippines that we have a problem with signal. They couldn't get a signal. And the only phone that they were able to get him on was a Hello Kitty pink telephone, that an old Nokia phone someone had, right? So the President Aquino called President Joko Widodo, Jokowi, and at 1 a.m. in the morning, she was rescued. Hashtag Save Mary Jane became hashtag Mary Jane Lives. That is also yours. Next. That's you. Clap for yourself. I'm going to end it with this, and I always end it with this, because we live in a country that is going to be greatly affected by, we are already greatly affected by climate change. The Project Agos was something that I wanted to do before we built Rappler. This is, if you're here, you know, you've been following us. We launched it in Social Good Summit in 2013, but now we have a new twist. We have a new partner. we're actually, Rena said earlier in the morning session that we're going to get married. So I want to actually tell you, Project Agos will now become Agos, drop the project, and marry Rena. No, marry Ateneo. So this is what Agos is now. Ibayanihan and Agos will be coming together, and you'll see this moving forward. And what I think this shows is the kind of collaboration we need to actually not just make things happen, but to scale, right? How do you get that hockey stick? You need to scale by partnering, scaling in collaboration. Project Agos is, if a typhoon comes, you can send information, you can send calls for help, you can SMS. Smart and Globe have already basically are giving those texts for free for anyone who needs to put information or has a call for help. At the same time, as texting, you can use social media, you can use hashtags that we've all created together over the last 3 years. And then the last one is you can go on site. And I want to show you again the tipping point of this one was this. You may not be able to see it, but this is Typhoon Glenda, and I remember it well because our managing editor is Glenda, and we had a lot of jokes about this. But look at the tipping point. I love this one. Up on top, it's baby and two yayas trapped, and you can see that Jodes and Voltaire give the names, and then NDRRMC responds to say, Ma'am, kamusta na po kayo dyan? First responders, there are more than 68 different partners of Agos who are working on the ground response, including WFP, including UNDP. I can't even put all of the partners in a logo. There are too many of them. And that actually is what we want to scale, right? This I love. Earlier today, we showed this. May babaeng nagle-labor sa ibabaw ng bubong. There's a woman in labor on the roof. And you can see what happened. Voltaire is with Move PH. It says Ressa Delgado is where she was. And then he updates. She was rescued by the Philippine Red Cross, which is also one of the partners in Agos. I'm going to leave you with a video of the tipping point of Agos, Agos Ibayanihan. And you can see what the power of the crowd can do. So I hope you can see that the first step is one person. One person has an idea to solve a problem. They build using the internet. That's the way you can scale fast. Or social media. Social media is really one that takes the cap off. Then finally, you bring in your friends. You bring in your community to solve that problem. It is the only way we will get rid of global hunger, and the only way that we will get rid of poverty, the only way we can deal with disasters coming to our nation. I leave you with this video. Let's roll it. Typhoon Glenda, known internationally as Ramasun, intensifies as it moves closer to the Bicol Samar area Tuesday. So you know everything here is crowdsourced. It comes from you, right? And if you pull that down, the purple is data. That comes from government. They've given us the data and it's layered on top of the map, and you can see the path of the storm, which we've gotten also from agencies, and the data that shows you where flooding is likely to happen and where landslides are likely to happen. The data soon will come that shows you where you can go for help, where roads are passable or not passable. And the tools that you can use in the future are built by Ibayanihan. DSWD, DPWH. Then you go to the next part of it, which is recovery. I said this morning that I was very optimistic that this is a different time, that we can do something if we do it together, if we set out to conquer one thing. I think at the UN on the second floor, you can actually solve one thing. I'm going to end with just this slide, and this is exactly the way I feel. Next. This was just posted a few hours ago. Helen Clark said this, and this is really the way I feel. And I actually think your generation, you're going to do things and see things that we can't even imagine. Ours is the last generation which can head off the worst effects of climate change. Head off the worst effects of climate change. And the first generation with the wealth and knowledge to eradicate poverty. For this, fearless leadership from us all is needed. Fearless leadership from you, so that you figure out what you want. That will help you figure out who you want to elect as your fearless leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for showing us some great examples of how we can use technology to improve lives, how we can use technology to change the world.